one of the things that I tell people when they start investing is you're not shopping for you. And I think that's like very important for, new investors. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Real Estate Investors Club podcast. We have another coaching call today with Stef and Mike, our young investor power couple. Hi, guys.
Thanks.
Hey, Terrie.
Hi, Terrie.
How you doing?
We're good. How are you?
Good. So before we jump into property management, you guys each want to give us like just a one-liner for people who haven't tuned in before, just to kind of, position know who you are, what you're up to.
Yeah, for sure. You want me to do it? Okay. So like Terrie said, we're young investors looking to get into our first real investment deal, and so we have tons of questions. We're super new, so Terrie's definitely helping us out in that sense.
All right. So what are we talking about today, guys?
We had questions on property management today.
Okay, let's do it.
So I guess the first question that we had before we get too deep is, you say that you specialize in non-performing properties and you go in and you turn them around. Can you just explain a little bit what that means? To like, what's a non-performing property, and like what are some overall steps that you take to do that?
Yeah, for sure. We've had some off-camera experiences, so I can draw from those pretty quickly. I can give you 2 examples from this week. So, one thing is, if you're looking at obviously like, low rents and the way in which you can bring some of those rents up to market value, that's one thing. Another is just a poorly managed building. And so what does that look like? It's when you're visiting it, the tenants have been left to sort of do whatever they want. And, earlier on this week, I visited one building that has like a bird sanctuary in it, where like literally the woman, I guess, was like, was breeding lovebirds. And so you walk in and there's like 1, 2, 3 bird cages stacked one on top of the other. And I like walk in, I'm like, a lot of birds in here.
You're talking about the smell too.
Oh God. So basically, like, you have that kind of a situation that has been left by someone, by the previous management. And so you have these problems that are there that are potentially depreciating the value of the building, because any buyer is going to take one look at that and be like, oh man, this is like really a big problem. So it's depreciating the sale price because nobody wants to deal with that as a management issue. And then there's also the fact of, if tenants have been left to do things that they're not supposed to do and they're paying very low rents, well, then that becomes a way of like sort of cleaning up the building of how, behaviors that people have that they shouldn't be having, and they're benefiting from low rents as well. So, that's kind of one situation. The other situation is, kind of the physical state and upkeep of the building. And that's the other thing, is that, when you kind of attack those problems, like, you as the owner might not like that there's a bird sanctuary in the building, or might not like, that we had another experience actually together earlier this week where, we visited a basement unit that was, done illegally, where the people are chain smoking, and then the ground floor tenant is busy, smoking the cigarette smoke along with the people downstairs because of a ventilation problem. Like, if you as the owner are able to clean that up, you're providing the residents with a better quality of life. And that's either worth, more money at the time of lease renewal, or else, should you have another tenant move in, or again, a sale property value, because nobody wants to visit a building and be like, this place is plagued by tenant management problems. And so you kind of have like 2 ways of making money there. One is by tightening up the tenant situation and adjusting the rents to market, and the other one is just cleaning up a building and bringing its value up, by making it more attractive to potential buyers who don't want to deal with that problem. And then there's also the whole expense column, right? Because like, some people often just don't necessarily understand what they're paying for. So, for example, insurance contracts, like sometimes, I'll see buildings where the insurance is like double what it's supposed to cost, because the owner maybe had a single family home with one company and they just called that company to give them an addition on their rental property, but that specific insurance company doesn't specialize in rental properties, so then they overcharge like crazy.
Mhm.
Or, another thing is if the previous landlord hasn't been doing their rent increases according to the TAL, which, you can also see if, for example, all the rents are the same, right? Like let's say they're all 700, 700, 700, 700. It means like somebody's not been using the tools that are given to property owners to adjust the rents. And so
Mhm.
like just by doing things professionally, you're able to up the value of the building just by taking it under professional management. And those are some of the ways in which you can do it.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you take on a bit of the headache, but the rewards come a little bit later on.
Absolutely.
I think just walking through the building this week, it was a bit of a reality check as to, we don't have much experience going through these buildings and seeing how people live. So it was a bit of a reality check to see what's going on. And my first instinct was get out of there. Like, this isn't for me. I just can't see the potential, but obviously that comes with experience, and seeing the potential that a building has is, I guess, super lucrative. So
Yeah. And I mean, and it's also, like one of the things that I tell people when they start investing is you're not shopping for you. And I
Mhm.
think that's like very important for, new investors to keep in mind, and to keep in mind that there are clients for all sorts of different products. And like if you drive like, whatever, standard SUV that's you bought in the last 3-4 years, that's one client. But there's people who buy secondhand cars that are 15 years old for $2,000 that have rust and
Mhm.
various little problems. And like there's a clientele for that. And so if you're selling Toyotas, if you're selling 20-year-old Toyotas, like don't be ashamed of your Toyota. There are people who are gonna want to buy that. And just
Mhm.
because you maybe don't identify it as something you would want to drive doesn't mean that somebody else is not going to be very happy, and that you can provide them a better quality of the type of product that they're looking for, which is going to make your units attractive versus someone else's. So
Yeah, definitely.
you got to pitch for your clientele, and then not forget that it's a business proposition that needs to be assessed the same way you would as if you were like opening a fast food restaurant. Like maybe I don't like to eat Big Macs, but there's definitely a market for that. And so I'm going to try to serve the market what it wants at a price that's advantageous to me and that the market can bear.
Mhm.
Right. Take all emotion out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question that we had is, do you use superintendents or janitors in your properties? And is it beneficial to have them? And are there cases where you wouldn't recommend it versus you would recommend it?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. So there's trade-offs, okay? If you have one of the tenants who is willing to take on some of that work, so, snow clearing, cleaning the common staircases, taking out the garbage, generally keeping an eye on the property, it's going to be much cheaper than if you hire independent contractors to come in and do it.
Mhm.
So it can be a way to save money, but it's definitely a double-edged sword. And it's an arrangement that as I progress as an investor, I'm less and less willing to make, because the first thing is you're kind of opening the door to abuse, right? And it's very rare that I've had a long relationship with a concierge that I'm actually happy with. And they tend to fall, it tends to fall into two categories. One category is, if someone who is happy to have the rent discount but just doesn't do the job. And so, every time I go to the building, I'm like dissatisfied with the garbage, I'm dissatisfied with the state of cleaning, and then I have to be texting the person and being like, did you do it? And then they're like, oh, okay, I'll do it. And then I know that if I don't go for another month, it's just not going to get done. So like I'm kind of spending money uselessly. So that's one case. And then the other case, which is kind of kind of better, but you'll see why not really, is like sometimes you have like a super, clean, persnickety tenant who is like wants to live in a clean environment. So they're very happy to like do those little maintenance things, but then they become this like overactive canary in a coal mine that's like
Hmm.
constantly chirping,
Okay.
And I've actually ended concierge deals for both varieties of reasons, because no, I don't want to be getting 12 phone calls from the building. No, I don't want to know and have requests of like, I need to put in, sonar paneling for $20,000 in every unit because people are mad at each other. Like, you need to filter that out for me. Like, I don't want those phone calls. And it's, it, it's kind of wasting my time.
Mhm.
So, those arrangements, like while they can save you money, it inevitably, ends up creating other kind of problems. And Then the other issue is that you also like have kind of a relationship with a tenant which is not purely like a tenant landlord relationship. They're also
Mhm.
kind of your employee,
Mhm.
and over time those are difficult relationships to maintain because, like I gave you the example of I had one very very high maintenance concierge who did a great job maintaining the building but was constantly calling me, and that was then frustration to the point where I'm like, okay, I can't have you doing this anymore because I don't want you to have my direct phone line to call me every 5 minutes. And the other one then becomes someone who either, then they pay their rent late. And so now, you're threatening them to open a file at the TAL because they're paying their rent late because they wanted the rent reduction, but then they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it just, kind of ends up in a complicated situation where you're mixing two relationships, and like that's a bigger discussion. But like very often when you're, mixing two relationships like friendship and business partners, or like tenant and concierge, or like employee and friend, like whenever you have those kind of blended relationships, I'm not to saying it can't work, but it's
Mhm.
just something that's more complex than just having a simple down the line relationship. I'm going to pay this person, we're going to have an employer employee relationship, I don't like their service, I'll hire someone else.
Okay.
And just a follow-up question. You had mentioned that you give them a rent reduction. Rent reduction. Would you also, so if you were to hire like a concierge who lives in the building, would you consider paying them, charging them regular rent, but then paying them on the side, like paying them as part of like your payroll?
Yeah, I mean,
Because
you can do that. There's really no difference because in terms of like what you declare on your taxes, basically like you're just declaring less income. And then you can sort of affect that, like in your rent increases, you can just affect that as a concierge service. And so like it's kind of half a dozen of one and six of the other. It's just that if you give a rent reduction, it's actually kind of easier from an accounting point of view because then they don't have to send you bills. So I've kind of always done it that way. But
Okay.
okay.
yeah.
I was thinking more from like when you go to sell the property, if you plan to sell the property, at least your rents look like they're higher.
Well, you always do declare the full rent and then declare a concierge agreement. So,
Okay.
like,
Oh,
because
okay.
yeah, and that's actually a good question because it exposes the what you're asking, which is that like with my concierges, like I do have a concierge agreement, and so they will have a lease with like one actual real rent amount, and then we have a concierge agreement that takes whatever $30, $100, $150 off in exchange for this service at this frequency. And like I found that in terms of keeping people on track, you kind of have to do that because you can't just be like, oh, take out the garbage and I'll give you $30 off. Like, no, it's
Mhm.
not specific enough and it needs to be written down somewhere. So
Right.
definitely. And then you declare your, when you come to sell the building, you declare your concierge agreement in your expenses.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And maybe to touch on the chirping tenant, what, like, let's say you're managing your own building and you're not hiring externally for property management. What boundaries are you setting in place with your tenants so that you're not getting phone calls 20 times a day? And then I guess it's a little bit personal, but I guess what's your approach?
Yeah. I mean, like, I also think that's a great question because I
Mm,
think if you're going to self manage, like, this is something you need to put in place, like, right from day one.
yeah.
And, my approach is always just be professional immediately. And so, even though you only have one unit, you're a professional investor and you want your tenants to deal with you in a professional way. And, like,
Hmm.
one of my big things is texting. And once your tenant has a cell phone number and they know it's your cell phone number, they're going to be texting you at 11 o'clock at night. And it's never nice, right?
Yeah.
Like the text messages you get at 6 a.m. or 11 o'clock at night are never, nobody's putting on their game face and having like a professional conversation. Whereas like
Mhm.
you would never, call your banker at 11 o'clock at night and like be like, where's my file? Text them something rude. No, you go through their phone service. And so like, even at a time when I didn't have an elaborate thing set up, like I just made sure never text the tenants, give the impression that it's a landline, or you can, there's cheap kind of IP phone addresses that you can have a reroute that goes through to your cell phone,
Hmm.
but it means that they actually can't text you. And like, that's my preference. And then when I call out, I have like the no caller ID function on my phone. So I put that so that they don't have, my personal phone number. And I try to push people to email or else, phone calls between 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And then obviously there has to be an emergency option somewhere.
Yeah.
But you really need to like intentionally set it up in a way that works with your life. And so some people don't mind texting. Some people prefer to receive like a text message alert. There are all kinds of services. There's like a phone to text thing where like they call a number and they can speak a message and then you get a message like kind of translated as a text. Like there's all kinds of solutions. And so before you just go and give out your personal cell phone number, like I would spend some time intentionally thinking, how do I want to run my business? Because you're running a business. And so, what's my client facing thing? It needs to be user friendly. They need to be able to get in touch with you, but it should not, you should be giving a professional impression so that you're minimizing unnecessary disturbances at unwanted times. And you're also like encouraging them to interact with you in a professional way. Like even if you're getting a call from like Bell that you didn't pay your cell phone, like chances are that you're going to be interacting with that person as a professional, as opposed to, when your landlord is like, oh, the rent is late. And then the person ends up swearing at you. Right. Like, and, anecdotally, like even in terms of my own properties, like my tenants don't know if they live in a property that I own or if they live in a property that I manage, because I'm just Teresa adjointe comptable. And I'm the manager who's dedicated to your unit, and I'm the person you talk to at the management company. But like, do you know that I own the building? Not necessarily.
Okay. That makes sense.
Have you really been listening to the episode, or has your monkey mind been taking you off in one direction or another? Our mental habits can be our biggest assets or our biggest liabilities as we pursue certain goals. For me, the biggest performance gains have always come from training my mind. In my book, Mindful Landlord, I talk about how you can train your mind and how you can apply some of these strategies to your journey in the real estate field. The book is available on Amazon and also on its website, mindfullandlord.com. Now I'll stop evangelizing for the power of mental training and let you get back to the show.
I'll just pivot a little bit here. Do you ever do quarterly walkthroughs or regular walkthroughs through your properties to maybe just do some preventative checkups? Because sometimes I feel like tenants might just let things go, whereas as a property owner, you know that there could be some negative consequences down the line if you let a certain issue last too long. Is that something that you do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll even go one step further and say, some of the properties that I have under management, because I don't manage all my own properties now. I do walkthroughs of those properties too, every so often, just because I don't have 100% confidence that the property manager is going to be as on top of some of those niggling issues as I would be. And there might be things there that are not to my liking. So I definitely find pretexts, like even though I have staff who, is usually doing the back and forth, like I will go through walkthroughs, and then I actually have, one sort of trusted employee who like works internally at my company that has the same sort of standards as I do. And so when she goes and, she'll do visits or do other things at the properties, and like, I know that like if something's up, she will let me know, and then I can address it as if I was there physically. And she's not like, she's someone that I pay myself. She's not an employee of the property management company, because you have to think like the way the information flows is the employees of the property management company is going to tell the boss. And if the boss is trying to like, he has 1,000 things on his plate and doesn't have time to deal with Terrie's building, he's not going to take the time to call me and be like, oh, guess what? Your concierge didn't take out the garbage and it's building up. Like, I'm not going to be aware of that, and I'm not going to be able to kind of track what the manager's doing. So
Okay, do you do like walkthroughs inside the unit as well, or just exterior through the hallways and stuff?
I wouldn't say that I have like a formal thing where I'm like, oh, okay, it's March 1st, I need to do my walkthrough of this unit. But it's more just like I have, a pretext that if it's in Montreal, if it's in the city, and I know this day my path is taking me close to the building, sometimes I'll just go have a look, or like I'll be like, oh, I haven't been there in a while. Like, instead of sending my employee, let me go and do it. And then with the stuff that I invest in, like in secondary markets in Trois-Rivières, like, okay, it's been 3-4 months, I haven't gone to Trois-Rivières, like maybe now it's time for me to go. And then I will just take a drive by to all the properties and like go through the common areas. Am I going into every unit? No, I'm not.
Okay.
But if there are specific units, like you get to know your tenants and you get to know where the problems are. And there are units that we have like an inspection calendar. So, like right now we have about 2 problem tenants that their units we're going into every 2 weeks to a month because there are problems that we're checking on. And so if it's not me, then it's my assistant who's going because they've received notifications and we want to make sure that their standard of cleanliness is up and everything else.
Okay.
And when dealing with the tenants, in terms of like collecting rent, delivering messages and communicating with them, you talked about being professional. So what are some of the ways that you would, set that up to maintain that professionalism?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I always use the bank as a as a benchmark, right? Like when I'm calling my banker, like they have a phone system, I have to press 2, I have to leave a message.
Mhm.
Half the time they don't pick up the phone right away, or I have to write an email and I don't expect to get a message back 1 second later. So, it's like some version of that. So like I have to set up, I don't want texting because
Yeah.
I find that it brings out the worst in people. I don't want to text with my tenants, so I'm always on caller, no caller ID.
Yeah.
And then they have a number that they call into where if they press a certain option, they can talk to me at any time, but they
Mhm.
don't really know that I'm just an option on that phone. And if I don't want to pick it up, it goes straight to like a digital voicemail that I can then listen to. So I can screen the calls and kind of know what's going on.
Okay.
And then, it does take some self-discipline because like it's very easy to just fire off a text message because it's easy. And so you
Mhm.
have to set up a system and then you have to respect it yourself. And, I just take the model of like the way my banker or my insurance company communicates with me. And that's how I communicate with my tenants because I want to be perceived as the property management company,
Okay.
um, who you don't just insult because they're the owner writing the checks. Like I'm
Yeah.
just the manager,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
And what about in cases where you want to have like official like documentation for, I don't know, you need to send them something to sign or some paperwork, or you need to send them a notice. What would you do in that case? Is it just an email or?
Well, again, it depends what exactly you're doing. I mean, if you're starting like a kind of a legal proceeding,
Mhm.
very often that begins with a formal notice, right, or mise en
Yeah.
demeure, right? And and that needs to be delivered by an official channel. So if you want to do it smoothly, you send a recommended letter. If you want to like deliver it with some punch, you send the bailiff.
Yeah.
And people when you send the bailiff, people take it seriously, because
Yeah.
it's costs money and it's a person who's not going to go away. You can't not sign for the bailiff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
um, but for kind of softer issues, like I'll give you the one example. One of the tenants who's on like a 2-week visiting schedule, like he had like just a very bad cleaning problem, and it was beginning to like attract mice and kind of pollute the building. And so like when we notified him of that, it's like I write an official email and then I call. Or sometimes I'll
Okay.
call first and then follow up and be like, look, I need to send you an official communication about this, but I want to have like a conversation about it so that you know what's going on. And then very often, like it will be something like that where if I'm trying to, get a situation back that can be pulled back with goodwill, I'm
Mhm.
kind of combining those two things. I mean, then there are obviously people with who the relationship's more complicated where like I do just force it through written channels because it's sometimes verbal communication, you don't want to give them an opportunity to fly off the handle at you, and because you do need to sometimes be concerned about writing everything down and how the
Mhm.
communication happens to document like,
Mhm.
no, we're addressing this problem, this and here are the steps, and I want to track every single one of the steps. So
Okay. That
Okay.
makes sense.
And in terms of collecting rent, is there one method that you use for all your tenants, or is it like some tenants will pay by check, some will do e-transfer, some you'll do direct withdrawal from their account? How does that work?
So I mean, we use the property management system Proprio Expert, and they have
Mm.
actually like an electronic payment system integrated, which sends the tenant an email, and then they can pay either with their credit card or by doing like a bank transfer. And the nice thing about that is that it then deposits the money directly into the appropriate bank account. Now, if you have 3 units, I'm not recommending that that's necessarily something you can do. You might want to either, then you can get post-dated checks or you can accept e-transfers. But, at one point I was accepting like 100 e-transfers, right? So like I have, I have my 10
Yeah.
checks to deposit, and then I'm spending like a day doing e-transfer deposits. And I was like, no, like this is not, somewhere that I want to go.
Mhm.
There are some property managers who put in like there's direct debit systems where you can like just get like a recurring payment, but um, tenant buy-in for that is a little bit more difficult because they have to fill out a form.
Mhm.
Some people don't like to do it. Some people, it's just in terms of getting like the collaboration of people. I found that the electronic payment system that sends them an email has the highest rate of success because they receive an email on the first and then they just have to click through and do it. But like I would be lying to say that if we had 100% success with that, we don't. We have some old people who only function with checks and have no online banking. Then we have some people who we can't get off the e-transfer system. So like I am still depositing some
Yeah.
e-transfers.
Yeah.
Okay.
um and if you have less units, like if you have like even up to 15 units, like you might just want to go the e-transfer route because it's simple.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so maybe we can pivot a bit again. We hear a lot about the TAL, or the Régie de Logement, being in favor of the tenants. And as a landlord, maybe you can speak to some of the challenges that you face, or is there a misconception that it's always in favor of the tenant? Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, like is it something we should be scared of
Yeah.
or use it as a tool?
Well, um, I mean, I think realistically a bit of both.
Okay.
The laws in general, like, are pretty tenant facing. I mean, if you talk to somebody who, is in other provinces of Canada or somewhere in the US, like they will actually like laugh when they hear, what our tenancy laws are. Now, if you're investing in Quebec, that's just kind of the cost of doing business. And so you have to, I would say, make your peace with it.
Mhm.
I go to the TAL, I want to say every 2 weeks or every month. So
Okay.
yeah, no, I mean, by now, like, I'm kind of not intimidated. I think you need to be prepared that the first like 2, 3, 4 times you'll be intimidated. And like the judges are also, it's a mixed bag. So,
Okay.
sometimes you will get a judge who's like more in who will listen to you and be more in favor of whatever you have to say. Sometimes they're really giving you the smackdown and not letting you talk. And then that can be kind of like a bit intimidating. But I
Mhm.
think, once you kind of know the laws, it's almost easy to predict like when you're gonna win, when you're not gonna win, when they might find in favor of the tenants. And to me, like I think the biggest problem is ignorance when it comes to this. I think a lot of owners don't get to the end of a specific process because they think, oh, we can't win, and like the
Right.
rental board, actually there are a lot of tools, but you kind of have to know how to leverage it in your favor. And I'll give you an example. Like when I do go to non-payment files now, I systematically you can go for non-payment, but then you can also go for consistent late payment.
Okay.
And so now, like when I open a non-payment file, I always check the box for consistent late payment. And then even if the tenant has paid up by the day that the audience is, very often like the owner just won't go because they're like, oh, the tenant doesn't owe me any money anymore. And so like, let me just give up on this. But like, no, you can go and request from the judge that they condemn the tenant to pay always on the first.
Okay.
And so there, it's perfect for you because now you don't have to run after, like if the tenant has payment issues, like now you don't have to run after them. So either they're responsible for making sure their rent is paid on the first, and the first time they don't pay on the first, you're back at the TAL and you ask for an eviction.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's like really knowing that when, you open a file or when you're going to use the system, like, okay, this is a case in which the system will help me, or this is a case in which good luck, and like
Yeah.
everything that's not payment issues, very difficult to use the TAL as a tool to get compliance, like for, cleanliness or damages, or well, actually damages after the fact is one of the places where I've had the most success when tenants really like break a unit and leave damaged. Like winning a
Okay.
case like that is not that difficult, but like kind of ongoing cleanliness problems or like ongoing damages while they're occupying the unit, it's very difficult to use the TAL as a way to rehabilitate that situation.
Okay.
Okay.
And let's say you do have to take a case to the TAL, like what would you recommend the best way to be prepared is, other than knowing what the laws are? Like, is it bringing evidence, or what would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that there's just like so many permutations of things. And like now with the experience that I have, like I know exactly how to prepare a file, and I know like, okay, like for example, the late payment thing.
Mhm.
Like sometimes the judge will just, you show their payment history for the last year and the judge will be like, okay, that's enough to condemn them.
Okay.
Sometimes they want to know, is this causing you a serious prejudice? In which case you have to bring the proof of the credit line that you've been borrowing on, where you've been incurring interest costs, because they have to show that you actually have some kind of a financial prejudice, right?
Okay.
And so like, because I've just played that chess game out a bunch of times, I know like I can prepare my file that like if I get a stroppy judge and they ask me difficult questions, like my file is deep enough that I'm going to win anyway. Obviously, there are lawyers who do this, and if you have a high stakes file and you feel like you're kind of new at it, maybe you hire a lawyer, and
Okay.
like they have an hourly rate of $200 an hour. It's going to cost you whatever $800, $1,000 for the day, because they're going to have to go and sit there and da da da. But maybe that's money well spent, depending on how much you're looking at getting, or if you're looking at getting an eviction or something that's going to stand to bring you money, maybe you just hire a lawyer and go sit with them. And once you see how they prepare the file, then you're going to know how to represent yourself the next time.
Yeah,
okay.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. We have a few more questions, but I think
we have time for one more.
Yeah. Okay.
So pick the one that's at the top of your list.
What are some ways? So if we were working with a property management company, but we're early on in our investment careers and we don't have much money to pay the full amount, what are some ways that we can split the tasks with them in order to save some money, but also get some help? How would you recommend approaching that?
Mm-hmm.
And what tasks are realistic to ask someone else to do, and what's realistic for new investors to do?
And is that even possible?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough thing. And I'll tell you why. So, property managers don't have huge profit margins. So they're going to be taking on your management business from like somewhere between 5 to 7% of gross rent. It's not a lot of money.
Mhm.
And one of the other things is that property managers, like sometimes for you as the property manager, it can actually be more work to have to work around someone else who's like partly self-managing, and then you're doing part of the work. Like sometimes that can really be a pain unless the tasks are divided up very well.
Mhm.
Me at this point, for most of my units, I keep the administrative admin, so rent collection, any tenant, like tenant relations that require the towel, like I do that in-house from my office here. And then the property managers on site will do more of like the handling of the maintenance. So, that is one way that you can split things up, but I feel like that's something that's more when you get into the professional level. I think that's more, something that you can do at that point. And I would say when you're starting out, your choice really is self-manage or hire someone. And, I usually recommend people to start self-managing if it's at all possible.
Mhm.
And that way you get to know your property, you get to know what you're doing. And then when a year later you hire someone, you already have a grasp of the tasks that they're doing, and you already have a relationship with the property. And
Yeah.
so, even if you're investing, let's say, out of your home market, I would recommend to be as kind of involved as you can initially on the self-management. And like, I know it's not easy, but if you have a triplex, an hour away, maybe you do try to manage that for a year and, get the plumbing contacts yourself. And, if the property's in not too bad shape, maybe you can handle that, from a distance. So,
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, thank you for the 20 questions on property management.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having
Anytime.
us.
Yeah. Thanks for answering your questions.
Thank you for coming on the show again, and sharing your questions and your journey with the audience. I think as we try to do more coaching calls, it's refreshing for me to see the questions that people have initially and the concerns that they have, and to be able to address them in this format. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
We
Thanks so
appreciate it.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terrie.
Bye.